This is Omer Stewart's book. This is a really great book on the peyote religion. He was America's expert on the peyote religion. And he was the expert witness in federal court when they were, some people were trying to legalize the peyote as an American Indian religion and should be protected under the freedom of religion part of the Bill of Rights.
Should we back up and talk a little bit about your birth and?
Oh, okay.
Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I like it was yesterday. I was born in 1946, and it's sort of a strange history because my parents were living in Durango, Colorado. My father had just won a contest of jewelry making that was sponsored by Mr. Taylor, who owned the Taylor Raymond Jewelries in Durango. And Mr. Taylor he wanted a Navajo silversmith, and so he conducted a contest. And so these different Navajos came to the jewelry store, and Mr. Taylor sat everyone down and basically gave them the silver and turquoise to make jewelry. And so my father won that contest. And so that's how my parents ended up in Durango, Colorado. My dad was hired as a jeweler for the store. And but the situation was at that time, without money and everything like that, my mom went to Farmington. Across the river on the Navajo reservation, there was a little small health clinic that was run by the Episcopal Church, and that's where I was born. So I was born in New Mexico on the reservation, but basically grew up in Durango. And one point of interest is that I was the very few people in my family that actually went to a public school. Everyone else in the family went to a boarding school, in particular Ignacio, Colorado, where there was a large boarding school there, a short distance from Durango, that had Ute kids and Navajo kids. And that's where my mom and dad went to school, and basically most of my family went to school at Ignacio. And eventually that boarding school closed down, but by this time I am attending school, elementary school, junior high, high school in Durango. In fact, in a week we'll be having our 50th anniversary for our graduating class in 1964 in Durango. But I can't attend because of this event this weekend. And some of the people are staying over, so I'll be here for the rest of the week, and I won't be able to make it to the 50th anniversary of my graduating class in high school. For a long time was the only Navajo student in public school in Durango. When I get to high school, there are other Navajos that are attending school, but they dropped out. And there was a Dusty, he was a Ute Indian. He graduated in 1963, a year before I did. A very rare event for that tribe too, that you would get a high school graduate attending public school. So I graduated in 1964, and I applied to the University of Colorado and Colorado State University. My tribe had an IQ exam for people that applied for tribal scholarships. I didn't even know that there were tribal scholarships available for college. There was a Bureau of Indian Affairs official that came up from Window Rock, Arizona. He was taking a tour of all the public schools surrounding the reservation. The high school principal knew me. So when this BIA character came out of the woodwork, basically with his briefcase, the principal was kind enough to drag me out of class and to sit me down with this person from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And it was really sort of interesting. This person was very hungover, He was having a rough time. He was really not feeling very well. But he felt that I would be eligible for a scholarship to go to college. And he wanted me to attend a math class, like a summer class at Haskell Institute in Kansas. So he made me apply for that. He made me apply for the Navajo Tribal Scholarship too in Window Rock, Arizona. A few weeks later, got a letter from the Navajo tribe stating that since I was interested in higher education, included in the letter an IQ examination that the principal gave me in the library. So I took the examination. Very, very easy. But I got the highest score ever in the whole history of the tribe in this IQ exam. And then that score was broken by 1 point by another Navajo, Calvin Red Horse, that also came to the University of Colorado majoring in physics. After the IQ exam, it was after I took it, mailed it in. About 3 weeks later, the tribal official came up from Window Rock to see me. And he told me that they would give me a scholarship to any school in the country. I picked the University of Hawaii, and he said no. He said, you can't go to Hawaii. And I said, why not? It's not part of the United States, was the argument. The reason why I wanted to go to the University of Hawaii, because Elvis Presley had just, a movie was on at the theaters, Blue Hawaii or something like that. And so I thought that, well, that's a really nice place to go. Because I looked it up in the library, and there was a University of Hawaii there. So when they said no, I thought, well, I've been up here to Boulder at the University of Colorado because I was part of the Crucible Science Club at the high school, which was the astronomy club, chemistry club, that type of thing, all combined in one. And I became president of that. They decided that for me to apply to the CU Boulder and to CSU, and I was accepted by both, and I decided to come here to Boulder. And that was quite the experience. It was a very shocking experience to leave Durango and come to Boulder basically without very much money except for my tribal scholarship. That was about it. I was here at the university majoring in physics, and I met quite a few wonderful people. The problem at that time was when I showed up, they thought I was a white person because of my name, Charles Cambridge. And I got a lot of letters from all the fraternities wanting me to join their fraternity. When I showed up in Boulder with my suitcase, I wasn't white, and so they didn't know what to do with me in terms of my placement in the dorms. So they sent all the rejects that were coming in, and there was a lot of different reasons why you were rejected in terms of placement to a room in the dorms. And so there was about maybe 50, 60 of us gathered at Kittredge Commons, all waiting for assignment to the room. But they decided to basically take one wing of Arnett Hall, kick everyone out that was there, and basically put everyone there. These were the Arabs, these were black football players, these were a few Chicanos, some Japanese students and whatnots. And so I ended up in Arnett, and I found out later, this was at the time that the university was segregating the races in the dorms, and so segregation was occurring in the dormitories. And that policy ended shortly after I arrived at the university. Except in my sophomore year, they finally figured that I was not white, and they placed me with the Japanese students and the foreign-born Asians and the other American-born Asians in Baker Hall. A couple of the wings there in Baker were Asians. And so all the Asians thought I was Asian. All the white students thought I was Asian because I was living with the Asian. And that was quite the adventure at that time. But in 1965, as I was talking about earlier, I met Omer Stewart. the great anthropologist, great authority on the peyote religion, who helped legalize the peyote religion in the United States by his expert witness testimony in federal court. And he's the one that brought me into the American Indian Development Work Camp, or not work camp, but summer camp here at the university, the 6-week course. And this is the group, and this is the activities in terms of their educational activities that was attacked by Vine Deloria in his book, Custer Died for Your Sins. So I think Vine made several errors in that book, and it's a situation whereby these were really great people. These were experts in anthropology and sociology and history, etc., that brought a bunch of Indian students together for 6 weeks. Through Omer's influence, that's when I moved out of anthropology moved out of physics, excuse me. I moved out of physics into anthropology. And I still have a love for physics, and I still try to keep up with the literature, what's going on in physics. Some amazing things are going on. So every now and then I'll post something on Facebook about the great discoveries of black holes or the latest in quantum theory or something like that. Because I'm a strong believer in interdimensional setup of the universe, where the universe is not just one holistic piece, it's like multi-universes and multi-dimensions. So I still keep up with the literature in physics, and I do have a great time doing that. But in anthropology, discovered something that I never knew about or understood, and that basically was human beings. And so the more that you study human beings and other cultures, the more you learn about yourself in return. And so this became a great field for me. Besides cultural anthropology that I got to initially, I went into archaeology also. And I also went into medical anthropology. And I've taught classes in biological anthropology. So I do have a love for that aspect of anthropology. One thing is that one thing that got me into trouble with the department was everyone had an understanding that you had to specialize in something. And this was going on in all of the academic fields. You had to specialize in something and become the expert in that particular something. I went in the opposite direction because I had interests in everything. And basically I wasn't specializing in one thing or one aspect of anthropology. I began to dabble in many different areas and whatnots, particularly the mathematics of anthropology, like statistical analysis and those types of things. And I got into deep trouble with members of the department, to the younger generation of the department. The older generation, like Omer Stewart and other people, Duart Walker and Gordon Hughes, etc., they understood what I was going through because it was their understanding of what the field was. And so I became known as a generalist in the field of anthropology. And that's what the old people, the old professors were. They were generalists. The younger generation was pushing people into specializing, and that you needed to become an expert in one aspect of anthropology. The generalists were going off in a different direction. Basically, you try to become an expert in everything, because if you try to do it, know about everything, then that helps you in terms of what you're analyzing. Gives you multi-dimensional views and reference points to something that you're studying. The younger people didn't like that. The younger professors didn't like that. So I get into massive trouble with them over that aspect, and many fights occur over the years concerning that. One big fight was a lawsuit. I finally filed a lawsuit against the university. I have fond memories, but it was a painful situation that I went through. concerning my relationship with the department. But before that, what you're asking or what you're looking for is the history of EOP. We really didn't understand.
Want some water or
Crown
Royal?
I would love. Can we take a break?
Sure.
A Crown Royal
Yeah.
break?
Crown Royal. Smiling Charlie.
Oh yes, Crown will solve all the world problems. Point of all of this, and many things that I do, is that everything affects everything. It's everything in the known universe. There's gravity that affects every other particle in the known universe. There's something that baby crying somewhere will affect the totality of the universe. So I believe there's cause and effect, and it will ripple throughout the universe. And it's reflective of everything that I've done, because when we started the EOP programs in 1969, it basically was building up on the experience that I had with American Indian Development in terms of their workshops and the National Indian Youth Council, Clyde Warrior Institutes of American Indian Studies, which was a reflection of the American Indian Development workshops. And so in 1969, we had 3 programs, one at UCLA, South State University in Wisconsin, and here at CU Boulder. From that, I had about maybe 40 students here in Boulder. At the end of the term, at the end of our program in July, I was approached by some of the students. They asked me if they could stay here at the university, if they could continue their education in Boulder. And that was a really interesting question, because I really didn't know the answer to that. In most cases, when something comes up, there's a question, I don't know the answer to it. I'll try my best to seek out an answer. And so in this situation, I thought about it for a few days, and I called the administration and I talked to Roland Rautenstrauss, who was a professor of engineering here at the university. At our meeting, I explained to him that we had this project on campus. It was bringing the university a lot of prestige, which he liked, and that I had been the only American Indian student here at the university, and I was getting lonely, basically, and that some of my students in this institute had asked me if they could stay here at the university, but we didn't have any money and they didn't have any money. So he thought about it, and at our meeting he said, well, I'll give you $5,000. I didn't mention the figure, I didn't mention how many students or anything like that. He gave me $5,000, made a commitment, and he took it out of the Norland Library Fund. So he basically stole the money from the librarians and the library, and set up a special account, gave me the $5,000. Right after, at the meeting, he called the dean of admissions, told him that they would have to work with me, that we were bringing in Indian students, and they were currently students at the university, and so we needed to make arrangements that there wouldn't be any problems for coming in the fall. So I went downstairs. Rautenstrauss's office was on the 3rd floor of Regents Hall, and I went down to the 1st floor of Regents Hall to see the dean. He was really agitated. His body language was not good. And we sat in the conference room there at the offices, and he told me that he did not want American Indian students to attend the university. Without my asking him why, he basically said Indians would bring down the standards of the university. If anything was left to him, he would not allow the university to allow Indians to attend. And I wasn't upset. It's something that you learn how to anticipate in a lot of situations. It's something that's going to be natural. It's not going to go your way, period, no matter what you do. So I didn't get mad or anything like that. I just walked out of his office without saying goodbye, and went up to Rautenstrauss's office on the third floor, told the secretary I needed to see the vice president, and she walked me back there and knocked on his door and said, "Charlie's here to see you." And he looked up and was wondering why I was there, and I explained to him what the dean had said. He was angry. He was not a happy camper. And he got on the phone and yelled at the dean and basically said, "We are going to bring Indian students to campus." He was sending Charlie Cambridge back down to talk to him. So I went back downstairs. The dean refused to meet with me, and the assistant dean was there, and we talked about how to basically initiate the paperwork for fall. And so he gave me a bunch of forms and everything like that. And I took this back to the group. There was about 10 people, 11 people that wanted to come. Gave them the forms to fill out, and they did, and walked that back over to admissions. And they were basically admitted to the university. I had $5,000 for one semester for 11 students. And this became a tight budget. So to save money, we rented a room, a large part of a rooming house off campus, and it was next to the Flatirons Theater. It was an old 2-story basement house, and so we all had rooms there, and the deal was that they would provide free meals. That turned into a problem because a free meal was just macaroni and cheese for the most part, and tuna salad, and so that became a big issue, and there was some violent disagreements with the landlord over many things. He owned another rooming house, and they were getting really great meals. So we would run over there as a group and chow down over there and run back to our rooming house and everything like that. So he started getting mad about the whole thing. So as a compromise, our meals became a little bit better. It wasn't perfect, but it was livable. And in the spring, I spent the whole $5,000 for fall. So along November, I went back to Rautenstrauss and told him I spent all his money. And he said, "Well, I thought you would." So he had already $5,000 waiting for me for the spring semester. And that's what basically started the Indian population of students at the university. And in the meanwhile, what was going on was that the Chicano and Black students were advocating for their EOP programs, and the university was beginning to work with them over these issues. And so they were moving inch by inch to establishing the Chicano and Black programs, and finally they got going. We didn't have any programs at all like that. All I had was the $5,000 from Rautenstrauss. The issue that brought everything to a head was the minority fee program. The minority fee program in 1969, 1970 was an attempt by the Blacks and Chicanos to impose a $5 student fee. From this money, they would set up the scholarship program. And this was quite a bit of money. You're talking about maybe, at that time, maybe 10,000, 12,000 students, $5 a head. You're looking at substantial money that they would divide up. I raised my hand at a meeting, and I said, well, we would like part of the minority student fee money. Everyone, the white administrators, the Chicanos, and the Blacks decided that Indians were not a minority and that we couldn't participate in this new program that had a very good chance of passing student government. And so we started lobbying with student government. What about the Indians? That type of thing. So we were causing some friction. White administrators were really pissed off at me for this advocacy because they didn't want to deal with another minority at all. They had enough issues with the Chicanos and the Blacks. And they were in greater numbers. All we had were 12 students on campus, my 11 students and myself. And so we weren't a force to reckon with. We were basically a minority within a minority within a minority. We were not significant at all. We were lost in in all of the space and time. And this is how come I started advocating with anyone I could meet. Fortunately, I met a really great person, and who I can't remember, Tim Cloverdance. Tim Cloverdance was his name. My memory just kicked in there. Tim Cloverdance was a tall, skinny, white student that was basically a great historian at that time as a freshman. But he started the organization called SCAR, which was the Students' Crusade for Amerindian Rights. And this was a group of white students that basically were advocating certain things concerning American Indians. And at that time, Tim started the demand to change Nichols Hall, the name of Nichols Hall, to an Indian name. That Nichols, being a participant in the Sand Creek Massacre, wasn't worthy to have a name on the building at the University of Colorado, even though Captain Nichols basically was one of the people that was responsible for the founding of the University of Colorado in Boulder. So there's a fabulous history of all of that, and there's a interesting history of his participation in the Sand Creek Massacre. So Tim started that, and if you look at my bathroom door, right above the door is one of the original signs of Nichols Hall. When the Board of Regents finally, after 25 years or so, finally approved the removal of the Nichols name and changing the dormitory to White Antelope Hall, I was given 3 of the signs by the housing staff because they knew I was so involved with this for so many years. And Tim had moved, and he became a professor of history at North Dakota State University in Fargo. And so I wrapped up very nicely one of the signs I got and mailed it to him. So he has a sign, and I have 2 of the signs here at the house, and one of them's over my bathroom door. So I met Tim and his group, and they started helping us with the advocacy of an Indian program and sharing in the student minority fee. And at that time, with Tim, we started advocating for the disadvantaged whites and the handicapped. Then I thought, well, the Asians. What we need to do is that we need to bring in another minority group, and the only one close enough were the Asians. And that was reflective of my roommate during my sophomore year, and that was Bob Siama, who was Army ROTC cadet. And he was in engineering, and man, he was a smart cookie. My experience with Bob, I thought, well, this is maybe a group that we should really look at. So I went on campus, and every Asian I met, I had a song and dance, like a 3-minute performance of why Asians should get involved in this and blah, 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 blah. Total rejection about 99% of the time. There was one gentleman, and he thought it was a good idea. I was looking for a meeting that they would have, an Asian group that would get together and meet. He liked the idea, but I never heard from him. I was giving out my phone number to everyone. So I finally gave up on that. I finally gave up, but this particular day, one day, I needed a Geronimo poster. My Geronimo poster was really torn. It's that famous poster where he's sitting with a gun.
Yes.
So Geronimo, that's fantastic poster. And then I wanted a Rockwell 1 million BC poster. That was the fab at the time, and the rage. And so went up to Madame Butterflies that had a great assortment of posters and whatnot. Up there, I met Elaine and Lynn. I thought, one last time I'll give my song and dance to the Asians. And I did. And Elaine, both of them, Lynn, said it sounded like a great idea. They were sort of confused about some of the details and were asking questions. and whatnots. And they said, well, we'll get together, we'll talk to some people and stuff. And within the week, Elaine called me, and they had set up a meeting, and it was in a large room, and I can't remember whose apartment that was, but there was like maybe about 30 people there. And Elaine let me speak and everything like that, and explain what a minority program could be or was, in terms of looking at what the Chicanos had done and what the blacks had done, and what we had done in the Clyde Warrior Institute. So I was advocating for classes, and I was advocating for financial aid and that type of thing. And the first step towards the financial aid was this minority fee of $5. Now, the blacks and Chicanos did not want to share that because they felt that the pie piece was, their portion was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the white administrators did not want this because they would have to deal with another minority. Now, we had support, like Dr. Rautenstrauss. He supported us in what we were doing. So there was a few administrators here and there that basically gave us encouragement to do this. But with Elaine, we're talking probably one of the greatest organizers, administrators I have ever known. In a matter of another week after that meeting, she had things down, putting stuff in paper, and she was going to meetings with me, and she got an example of the backlash of all of this negativeness from everyone coming at us. But we stood our grounds, and in various situations, we basically won out in the end. The university grudgingly granted us an equal status with the other minority groups, but that was based on the fact that the Civil Rights Commission in the regional office in Denver wrote a letter to the university stating that the university did not need to set up equal academic programs or assistant programs for the Asians or Indians. They were satisfied that the university was making a commitment to the Chicanos and black. That was really a downer for us because we were hopeful that the Civil Rights Commission would support us. We wrote to the Washington, D.C. office advocating our position and with a copy of the Denver letter. But eventually, a few months later, we got a letter back from the Washington office that the university needed to create an Asian Indian program if they were going to have a Chicano and black program, and that if the university was not, then they would have to discontinue the other two groups. But we're too far down the road with the other two groups, with the Chicanos and blacks, that the university couldn't walk that back. They're too far in terms of commitment and resources and everything like that. So the university grudgingly accepted the Indian Asian program. We went to Min Nasui in Denver, who was with City of Denver administration for help. We were very surprised at a meeting late one night at his office by Koufax and Spear. He told us that he didn't believe that the Asians needed the program. This is sort of really interesting because here's a really great man that is well known in history as being a true advocator of equal rights, etc. But he's telling us that perhaps an Indian program was okay, but with the Asians, no, we didn't need that program. So he basically rejected the idea, which was sort of sad because we never did understand his rationale for that. So we came back to the university, but we were far enough along, but the university, being the university, in a not a happy situation, they decided that we needed to be not punished, but in a sense ignored. So they gave Elaine and I a title with a very, very small salary, but they refused to give us an office. So we didn't have an office. So that became another point of discussion. And finally they conceded, and so our office was assigned to us in TB1, a building here on campus, temporary building 1, that was the beginning of the CU Medical Center, built during World War II. The building is still there. It's not temporary. It's still existing. Our office was to be shared with the building's janitor. So we were given we had to share this small room, which is about the size of this room, with the mops and everything like that, the janitor, and so we were given this room. Janitor was not too happy. We used to say Elaine and I were not too happy, and so we brought in 2 chairs into the janitor's room. And so the janitor was really getting upset. He was complaining like mad to people, but they wouldn't listen to him. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. He got a bunch of keys one day and he said, "Follow me." And we followed him to the end of the hall. And he opened up this big door. There was this massive room there. It had some old desks and everything like that, and a lot of old medical supplies that came in handy for different reasons. But anyway, the room had been used for decades and decades, and probably since the war, had sort of just abandoned this room. I didn't even know it was down there, even though we were in the hallway a lot and everything like that. But it had 2 double doors at the back that opened up over Boulder. It opened up right at the beginning of Ho Chi Minh Trail. That was in the back of the men's gym that led down the hill to Boulder. But we would open up the doors and we had this beautiful view of Boulder. And then right at the end of the trail, you walk a couple blocks and there was Uncle Joe's Plantation Barbecue. And so we would send students or walk down there, get some barbecue, walk it back to the office, and just have a big meal up there. And it was really a great office. But they wouldn't give us, so the janitor gave us this room, not the university. We got in there with a bunch of students. We cleaned up the place, made it really, really a nice place to be in. Then all of a sudden, the administration found out we had a room. And they came down to look at the room and everything like that, and they were really shocked by it and everything like that. But they refused to give us any administrative monies. They wouldn't give us a phone, they would give us typewriters, or any of the items that you would need to have operate an administrative office. So I figured a way of breaking into Mark Hanna's office, who was the head of the minority programs. The university decided to put all the minority programs under his wing, and I can't remember what else he was responsible for, but he had his office along with Robin Yetter, very nice person, very dear friend of ours, and he was there and sharing the office with Mark Hanna. But I figured a way of breaking into the office, their office, that no one could figure out to this day how I kept breaking into this office. Once we were in this office, then we could use his typewriters, we could use his telephone, basically envelopes and everything like that. We're sending out letters. We put it into the university mail bin and whatnot. We charged everything to his account. We had his account number there for mailing and for telephone usage and everything like that. So we were calling all over the country with Mark Hanna's on Mark Hanna's account. He got very, very upset with us. He couldn't figure out how we were breaking into his office. So he had bars put on the windows, double locks on the doors, all kinds of things, but we kept breaking in. And so because of that, finally the university gave us some administrative money, and that was a turning point in terms of what we were doing. And finally the other minority programs and administration finally decided that we were here to stay. And it became a really interesting situation, because with the Asian program and the EOP program, we were the only programs that got our paperwork done. We, like for housing, how many housing units is going to be required, our numbers of students that are coming in the future semester, their housing needs, and what financial aid is going to be needed for this population, et cetera, et cetera. So we had our projections, our statistics, everything ready when the administration wanted them. And the administration really liked that. One of the administrators was James Colbridge, who was a professor of law, and he came in, I can't remember under what president, but being a typical law professor, he really didn't know anything about minorities or their needs or anything like that. All he did was yell at the minorities. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. But when Elaine and I came to the meetings with all our paperwork and our little things done, he couldn't yell at either of us. He just sort of got frustrated because he couldn't yell at us for anything. And so he grew to like Elaine and I. At one particular meeting that he was really mad about something, I called him a member of the Hitler Youth Corps because he had blonde hair and blue eyes and that type of thing, and that really shocked him into another reality. He couldn't figure that one out. He couldn't so it became a learning experience for him. And it became a situation of learning how to deal with minorities and everything like that. He eventually becomes chancellor of the university. He's probably one of the greatest chancellors the university ever had in terms of running the Boulder campus. He turned out to be a very, very, very nice person and a dear friend to the Asians and Indians. So he did a lot for us. He did a lot for us.
More crown?
Yes. Oh, let me talk about the program. Let me talk about the offices, and let me talk about how all the Indians got pissed off at us here in Boulder. Getting back to the offices, eventually we leave TB1, and I was offered, and Lane was offered a series of alternatives where we could move our offices. The university really wanted to bring all the minorities together in one area. TB1, we were all together, but they wanted to give us more office space and more and better rooms. And but with me and eventually with Elaine, we decided that we really wanted to be kept separate from the university in one sense for many reasons. And so the university offered us rooms in this house off campus, just about half a block north of university. But this was a little house that the university press was located in on the main floor, and Elaine had her offices up there, and the Indians, we had the basement. And one key item in selecting this place, this house, was that it had a big backyard, and there was a barbecue pit back there, and we could party hardy and eat a lot at this little house. So basically, it was sort of a nice situation for us because we could bring all the students together and cook hot dogs and drink beer at the house and everything like that. And that we could not do on main campus. That would have been an impossibility. So we felt that our programs were a great deal in dealing with the social aspects of students and ourselves and the program. And so it wasn't just an academic, administrative type of situation. The facility of being in the house and the backyard was really a great thing for that, to all socially get together and mix and everything like that. When I leave as director in 1972, I'm followed by a series of directors, and eventually the university moves all the minority programs into Willard Hall. The university took half of this dormitory and converted their half into administrative offices. So they were knocking down walls and all kinds of things. And so this is where the minority programs, EOP and counseling and everything like that were housed. I still have fond memories of this house. As I said, a large part of what our programs were social. That was the big item. Eventually what goes on is that we decided that we needed to deal with the community directly. And this is when we formed Kimochi Incorporated, a nonprofit corporation, because we had done everything in the context of the university and the umbrella of the university in terms of academics and students, everything like that. And we wanted to bring a community component into all of this. And this is why we created Kimochi. And we fundraised and everything like that. And so we could do many things that were, say, non-academic, and bring students into the community and community people into the academics. So it proved a really compatible type of situation. And then eventually the Asians create CARP, which is another unique nonprofit. And CARP became really entrenched with dealing with the community and people in the area. So there were two nonprofits that were attached to all of this. One thing that negative for me was that all of the Indian EOP programs across the country that we're developing really got upset with me here in Colorado. What occurred was that at Colorado, we created this academic, really unique program. We have a relationship with the community and everything like that. But more importantly, I created a program that would only take rejects. Indian students that were rejected by other colleges, Indian students that had flunked out of other colleges and universities. In other words, I took people that no one else wanted, Indian people that no one else wanted. All of the other Indian EOP programs across the country were competing for the valedictorian types from all the Indian schools and public schools and everything like that. So they wanted the elite of Indian high school students to go to their campuses, improve the graduation rate of those programs. I went in the opposite direction, and this was really upsetting to all these schools, because I was rejecting their basic philosophy of getting the best and brightest of Indian students. I wanted people that basically needed a second chance or needed extra help. So I took the CD students here at the university. And basically what it turns out is that I was quite successful in terms of the graduation rate. Some of these people are attorneys, they became doctors, they became nurses, et cetera, et cetera. If they were left alone to sort of wander through life, who knows where they would have turned up. But I brought them to Boulder, got them to school. We had people that did flunk out. Then a couple of years later, they have this self-realization, and they on their own went back to school. Not back to here to CU, but somewhere else. And so this sort of ripple effect occurs. And so a lot of people were touched by the Indian EOP program as I created it. And that philosophy goes on for a couple directors after I left. By the third director, CU Indian EOP wants the best and brightest. And so it forgot its beginning philosophy. And that was a sad situation for me to see the program that I had designed that was proven to all of a sudden be discarded, and they become the same as other programs. God, there's so much. Oh, we could talk about my doctorate. My lawsuit, that's part of this story. That adds on to this a little bit. It makes it longer and whatnots. But the question is, see, when I resigned as director in 1972, I took my last paycheck, and with my good friend Ken Gary, we went drinking at the sink. I cashed a check with all that money. I went to the sink, and we got totally wasted. The next thing I remember is we're on an airplane to Canada, which is a really interesting story by itself. But the gist of why I'm telling you this is that I broke my leg in Canada skiing. So I was in a Canadian hospital for 2 weeks. the worst time of my whole life. Then I was able to fly and flew directly back to Denver, and I ended up in Wardenburg, the university hospital, for an additional 2 weeks. And so students were bringing me beer and everything like that. I was a student at this time, so I had student insurance. So I ended up in the hospital on campus. So the whole point being of all of this was that even though I had all of these misadventures and adventures, I continued to be a student. Basically, slowly, step by step, was going to eventually get my bachelor's degree. And that happened in 1976, mainly by accident. So I was the joke of the Indian Asian world for years, that I was the oldest living student in the universe. But in 1976, that sort of ended that story. And so after I got my bachelor's degree, I really didn't know what else to do. And it was because of Rautenstrauss. Now, Rautenstrauss became president of the University of Colorado. I was at a meeting somewhere. Oh, it was at the law school. I can't recall exactly what the circumstances were, but there was a lecture. I went to say hello to President Rautenstrauss, and he recognized me and said hello and everything like that. So we were talking about old times, and he said, what was I doing? And I said, well, I just graduated. And he said, what are you going to do now? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, why don't you just go to graduate school? And I didn't even think about that, graduate school. And so I said, well, if you get me in, which is what he did. He got me into the anthropology department at UCD because I was doing some work down there, and I was spending more time in Denver. I thought that would be a place to go. So Rautenstrauss got me into graduate school. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Colorado at Denver. And I wanted to return back to Boulder because here was where I knew most of the professors, the old guys, the old professors. And so I transferred from the anthro department to the anthro department here at the university, because in those years they said, we are one. We're one department of anthropology. So I transferred one campus to the other. Boulder people, the younger professors, were totally shocked by that, and they didn't want it to happen. After the fact, they made it very specific in their catalog that no such person would be able to transfer in like that. So I became a rule changer for that little aspect of the situation. Eventually earned my master's, and I applied for the PhD program. And I immediately get into trouble with the younger professors. I'm being counseled by the older professors. I'm hanging out with them, just enjoying their company and their philosophy and what they viewed as the field of anthropology in a generalistic situation. Well, eventually what happens is that I am approved by the graduate program and department chair for my comp exams. This is something you prepare for all your life, basically, because the comp exams in anthropology you really can't study for. They can ask you any question in the planet universe. Basically, something that you're not given a study guide, a book to read, or anything like that. There's no assistance in terms of what the material that you're going to be tested over. Basically, spent 2 years just reading anything and everything. So I get approval by the department and by the graduate school to take my exams. And this is a 2-day exam. And once you pass the exams and everything like that, then you're approved for your dissertation. By this time, I'm preparing for the dissertation too. And at that time, I was going to do research on the mafia in Indian affairs, the Italian mafia in Indian affairs, which I had done previous research years earlier on that for 2 years in Arizona, where the Italian mafia in Arizona was beginning to control Indian tribes and industry and water rights and everything like that. So they had their fine hands in a lot of stuff. So I wanted to revive that research. and to continue research in that area. I decided to take the exams in the spring. Decided a week before the dated time for the 2-day exam to fly to Los Angeles. And so I went to see my great advisor, Dr. Stuart Walker, to tell him that I was going to Disneyland for a week. I was just going to leave and I'll come back the night before my exams. And he didn't like the idea, but I left, and then I came back to see Stuart midday before the exams to tell him I was back, and he looked at me in a very angry fashion, and I said, "Oh God, what the hell did I do now?" He said, "The chair wants to talk to you." The chair. And it finally dawned on me, the chair of the Department of Anthropology. And I said, "Okay." And he picks up the phone and calls the chair and said, "I have Charlie here in my office. Do you have time to see him now?" And the chair said yes. And so Stuart, Dr. Walker sends me down the hallway, and I come into the chair's office, which was nice and decorated and whatnot. He had his favorite rocking chair that he did reading and stuff like that in. And he said, "Charlie, come on in." So I'm sitting, going for the chair that's in front of his desk, and he said, no, sit in my rocker. And then I knew something was up. It was not a good situation. So I sit in this rocking chair, and the chair tells me, "Charlie, I'm going to cancel your examinations." And this is after he approved them, and this is after the graduate school approved my exams. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you haven't fulfilled the seminar requirement." I said, What seminar requirement?" And he said, "Well, all graduate students must complete 3 seminars, which the 4 seminars that were available represented the 4 fields of anthropology: linguistics, physical anthropology, cultural anthropology, and archaeology. I had done 2 already. All I needed was 1 seminar to fulfill that requirement. But my response to the chair, the rule doesn't apply to me. Then we got into yes it does, no it doesn't routine. Tradition has been is that you come under the rules that are enforced at the time, that are in place at the time that you enter the department as a graduate student. So my rules at that time did not have any seminar requirement. I was technically right that I didn't have to take the seminar requirements. Well, years later, they imposed the 3 out of 4 seminar requirement. And so he's holding me to a new requirement. And so we got into that situation that I told him that I disagree with what he said. I told him I will never ever take a seminar course again in this department, which means that I was totally rejecting the rule. All I needed was 1 3-hour course, but I told him I refused to take it because what they were doing was imposing a rule that should not have been applied to me. Spent another 2 years in the department taking every other course except for a seminar. I had the highest amount of courses in anthropology ever. Finally, the university got upset, but here's a really interesting note in all of this scenario. This is really a mystery that hasn't really been solved to this day. This is 2 years of them getting really upset with me. And one day, I get a letter, it's really sort of strange, a letter to the Department of Anthropology saying I'm their best and brightest graduate student. And because of that, they're awarding me a graduate student part-time instructorship. So this is like free tuition, a small salary for teaching a class. This is really a really great honor in the department. So I get this letter magically signed by the chair, basically from the Department of Anthropology, that I would be given a class the following semester. So during fall semester, I thought, oh, okay, this is really cool. A week after I get that letter, a week later, I get this letter from the graduate school, signed by the dean of the graduate school, saying that, Charlie, because of your lack of cooperation, you are disenrolled as a student at the University of Colorado. They kicked me out of the graduate school, out. But I have this other letter. I'm the best and brightest, and you're the worst criminal on the planet Earth. Get out of here. So then this becomes a civil rights issue, the state of Colorado. And I eventually get a ruling from the state, yes, the university did discriminate against me. The younger professors were really angry about that, but the ruling named the dean of the graduate school, 2 associate deans, and 2 chairmen of my department. And they had to take race-sensitive classes after the ruling, and they were not happy. And that blacklists me across the country for any tenured position. I'm not sad about that. At least I did gain a victory. And at least these people had to take one class that probably lasted an hour. But it really, their egos were so intense that just taking an hour class on racial relations and stuff like that would really deflate them quite a bit. And so I was happy about that. So I was reinstated to the university. And because of my reinstatement, then they scheduled my comp exams. And that turned into another issue. My chair of my advisory committee, Dr. Walker, got my group together, which were all old professors, legends in the field, and created a list of questions that I would be tested over in a 2-day period. Unknowing to them, the chair imposed himself on my committee. There's a rule in the department regulations that the chair can place themselves on any committee in the department. So he placed himself on my committee. So he became one of my graders in my exam. And talk about the number of zeros I got from this person in grading. What saved me was that each question had to be graded by at least 3 individuals, 3 professors. So when he gave me zeros, the other people give me very high scores. And so it became that type of situation. So they gathered up all the scores for all the questions and everything like that. And one day, it must have been about 3 weeks later or so, one day I'm sitting downstairs and I see Dr. Walker come up the sidewalk here carrying a paper bag, and then he knocked on the door and everything like that, and then I opened the door and he said, "Charlie, can I come in?" I said, "Sure." So he comes in with his paper bag, pulls out a 6-pack of beer, and he said, "Charlie, you passed your doctoral exams." And that was really a happy moment. But then he told me, "You passed by 2/100ths of a point." Because this chair of the department placed himself on my committee and gave me zeros on everything. That wasn't enough to kick me out of the program. Because if I had failed that exam, then I would be given one more chance to pass. And if I failed twice, I would be kicked out of the program forever, and no other Department of Anthropology in the country would accept me. So it's really a life and death situation in terms of that situation. But the zeros I got from this individual that was really upset about sitting through a 1-hour class on racial relations, the zeros affected the score, but it didn't affect it enough to pull it down by 2/100ths of a point. And then I got angry when Dr. Walker told me that, and I wanted to get my axe and go down to campus. But he said, "No, Charlie, a pass is a pass." And that cooled me off. I passed it, and then I was approved to advance towards the dissertation. And by this time, because of the delay in the years of dealing with all of this issue, I think the whole time was like about 4 years of delay. Changed my mind about the mafia research. And at this time, I began to hear rumors of this new disease. In particular, some friends were affected by AIDS. And so I thought, well, this is something new, and perhaps this is something worth studying. So I began my research quite early, doing research on AIDS among American Indian population, how it travels through the population, everything like that. AIDS is something that comes from the outside. It comes from a non-Indian. non-Indian had sexual relationship with someone that was that had the virus, and they acquired it and is brought back to the reservation. See, my committee had already approved my idea of the mafia in Indian affairs as my dissertation topic, and then what happened was that people I knew, not friends, but people I did know, one person in particular, he was from Denver, and he was a gay individual, was happy that he got a job in Washington, D.C., so he had this party, and we all went down there and had a lot of fun, and said our goodbyes and everything like that to him. Well, 2 years later, he returns back from Washington, and within another year and a half, he's dead. He died very, very quickly. And no one was talking about what happened to him. There was this sort of like this wall of silence that immediately sprung up. And he was not the only Indian individual that went through a similar situation whereby passed away very quickly in the family, and no one would talk about the circumstances. And so then at the same time, there in the literature, newspapers, and they were reporting this strange new disease that was popping up in the gay population. And so I thought, well, here's something really sort of interesting. Indian gays were dying off, and dying off very quickly, coming from different economical status in terms of some were urban Indians, some were reservation Indians, some were rural Indians, and people that I knew about. And so it was something that I thought was interesting. And the more that time went on, the more that they started talking about this gay illness, and so I thought, well, I'll switch to that direction. From basically a social analysis of the mafia, what I would do is a medical analysis of what is going on with Indian people that were dying off of this new disease. And so what I did was basically I began to interview government officials and different people that were associated with research in this new gay disease. And then finally, basically came out that there was a virus. The HIV virus was here, and there was a patient 0 that they were searching for. This would be the first person that had the disease, where it came from, and basically it was still unknown, but they were searching for this individual, and basically it becomes like a detective private eye investigation, whereby you begin to interview different people, like where were you, how many sex partners do you have, who are they, blah, blah, blah. And you again began to trace through time each stage of how the disease moved to that particular individual. So you keep going back and going back and going back, and eventually the names become fewer, and they become similar. Maybe the same name pops up and whatnot. So you're slowly getting to the source of where this disease came from, or the origin of it here in the United States. And eventually what occurs is that we find that patient 0 was actually a flight attendant that had visited Africa. And so this was something that became a focus of attention, that we are now focusing and looking at this flight attendant as patient 0, how many sexual partners he had. He flew all over the U.S., and he just spread the disease like fire across the land. And so this wildfire was just spreading so quickly. I began to interview Indians that had the disease, and basically Indians, when they began to show symptoms of the disease, they would die within about a period of 2 years. They would go very, very quickly. And this is something unique about Indian AIDS patients, is that they, for a lot of different reasons, basically will go quickly. They're very late at reporting the symptoms. They want to hide the symptoms and everything like this. We had Indian people that believe they had acquired the strange disease because of their hidden closet sexual behavior and stuff. And so we had Indians from Denver actually going to Los Angeles to be tested for this virus. By this time, we began to see tests available that people would go in for a blood test, and several weeks later would basically have the results back. And so we had Indian people that were basically giving wrong information at the test centers or test sites or to doctors, and they would get the results, and they would know one way or the other if they had this new strange virus. And so the social behavior was a little bit different in terms of how Indians behave and whatnot. So you really just try to keep everything hidden from their families and their wives and whatnots. And so it was really becoming quite interesting, the years that I spent researching this. Now, what goes on is that I told you about my situation with the Department of Anthropology, how I was disenrolled from the university. And so I spent 2 years just taking odd classes, but I couldn't move. I couldn't take my comp exams, and I could not advance towards my dissertation research. But I spent that 2 years digging up information, talking to people, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't wasted time. So by that time, I had totally dropped the mafia research, and I really got into this new virus that was spreading across the land. And so with Indians, it came from the outside. It came from the urban centers like Los Angeles into Navajo. And so I interviewed some of the early patients. I tracked down talked to the doctors of patients that had passed away, et cetera, et cetera. And there was one really interesting case. This gorgeous young lady, she was from a tribe up north from Montana, and she just basically wasn't gay or lesbian. She was just doing straight sex with multiple partners, and the doctors finally told her that she had the AIDS virus or the HIV virus. And she didn't know what it was. They had to explain it to her, and basically told her it was a death sentence. She was facing death, and she got really, really super angry. And she said that she was going to get every son of a bitch out there. And what she did was she left and just became this sort of drunk around the reservation and the nearby towns. And she's beautiful, and she slept with every guy that she could. And so it was her way of getting even with whoever gave her the virus. And at this time, there's this philosophy or idea among the non-Indian gays and the Indian gays that this had to be confidential in terms of medical records, etc., that the U.S. government, Indian Health Service could not publicly divulge the name of individuals that had the HIV virus. And so this was kept a secret. I was of the opinion that if this virus really became entrenched, that we could see some tribes actually disappearing because of the extreme high sexual activities on a lot of Indian reservations and Indian communities, that once a virus got caught in that you would have something that would just spread very, very quickly across the land, particularly among young people like 14, 16-year-old kids. And so I became this sort of the one and only Indian expert on AIDS across the land. And it did get me into a lot of trouble. One, I was advocating that we needed to publicly divulge names of people with the HIV virus, because we really needed to make sure that similar situations like this girl in Montana would not occur, that people really needed to be protected and stuff. But the government decided that confidentiality would be the key to their policy. The other thing that really got me into trouble was that I felt that there were some traditional Indian practices that may spread the virus. And this was really something that was painful for me to even think about, how traditional Indian religious practices could help spread the virus. And this basically was a unique line of thinking. What is there in the Indian world that could help spread this virus in a non-sexual means? Well, there are tattoo situations where Indians would get tattoos from other Indian people. There's scarring, that's part of the religious ceremonies where you would scar yourself. And there are Sundance rituals whereby you pierce your body, and you basically have skin sacrifices or offerings whereby you take cuttings of your skin in a religious way and displayed in a religious way. But all of these were basically, in the old days, were using the same cutting tool or tattoo instrument from person to person. So you could see body fluids passing from one individual to another individual. I was on an airplane flight to Los Angeles, and I, for some reason, had obtained copies of a gay newspaper at the airport. I think it was in Denver, or wherever I was flying from to Los Angeles. I may have been in Nevada at the Las Vegas airport. But there was this gay newspaper that I was starting to read, and there was a story there that basically was advocating that gays, primarily white gays, should participate in sun dances, traditional Indian sun dances, because of its religious aspect. But there was a few lines about their painful aspects of the religious process of the Sundance. So, and I just sort of was really super concerned, because you began to see people with the AIDS virus participating in some of these Sundances, and that were not Indian, they were non-Indian. And so I felt that using the same cutting tool, the same knife, to pierce or to give skin offerings, transferring fluid from these people that were affected with the HIV virus would transfer to another person. So this became a really a point I was pushing. I was lecturing about this at conferences and whatnots, and I was attacked because a lot of these Indians felt that the spirits would protect them. So what if we use the same knife or piercing tool or whatever? The spirits will protect us, because this is a very religious, holy experience, and we are under the protection of the Great Spirit or the other religious entities. And I was at a camp, my summer volunteer programs that I ran for nearly 35 years. I had one camp in South Dakota at the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation. A really, really nice community up there, way up north. And we were at the campfire. We were all staying in tents and everything like that. And there was a group that had gone to the medicine people that were nearby, and they came over to share our campfire and everything like that. And one of the young ladies asked me my name, and I said, "Well, I'm Charles Cambridge from Boulder." And she was wrapped in a Pendleton blanket. Mm-hmm. She actually leaped over the fire to attack me. And she was hitting me, and she was yelling, "You're the person that wants to change our religion," and the comic strip, sounds of getting beat up. But I was really intrigued by that, and I didn't know my fame had spread across the land to that degree, whereby people are actually listening to my message. This was the first indicator that my message was going across the land. And I explained to her after she was pulled off, I said, "I'm not changing the religion. All I'm asking is people to be aware that they need to use different cutting tools and different ways of doing things, and that's all I'm asking for. You really need to protect yourself." And so it became a religious discussion, the power of the Great Spirit versus my concerns. And I said, I'm not attacking your religious belief or anything like that. I have my own religious belief and philosophy, and I'm very protective of that. But in terms of the reality of this situation, there are people dying, and we really need to protect ourselves because we're very few people. And so that was quite the experience and an educational moment for me. I did learn a lot from that experience. But I continued in what I was saying, and I at meetings, people would come up and ask me if a certain religious practice in their particular tribe was basically dangerous, because a medicine man actually came up to me once and told me that he didn't want to be accused of giving someone AIDS during his religious ceremonies. So he asked me about something. I said that's okay, because there hasn't been any proven case of what he was referring to. He was referring to like drinking out of the same cup, and whatnots. And I said, well, there isn't any proof that the virus has spread in that method, and that simple drinking out of the same cup, in my feeling at the time, was okay. So he was really happy about that. Now with the Sundance, I finally get off the hook with a lot of people when the very, very famous chief Fool's Crow, really, really old man, and I had known him for a long time. He came and lectured in one of my classes at the University of Denver many, many, many years ago. He was old then, and he lived up in South Dakota, and when I had seen him up there, he was old, still old, and but it was really funny. He, in a sense of my looking back at this, he conducted a very famous Sundance, and he had a lot of non-Indians, non-tribal members, non-Sioux people come in and participate in his Sundance. But one day he cracked down. He basically told everyone that he only wanted tribal members involved in his Sundance. And what he did that particular time was he went down to the Indian Health Service Hospital in Pine Ridge, and and he asked the doctors about HIV, the AIDS virus, and how he could protect his sun dancers. So that's when the Indian Health Service developed a sort of toolkit in a little baggie. It would be a cutting scalpel, it would be bandages, simple things that could be used during the sun dance ceremonies. And Fool's Crow had a box of these little things that the Indian Health Service put together for him, and he told everyone that they either had to use their own cutting tools, knives, whatever, for them personally, but he also had a box of holding up, a baggie with the scalpel and everything like that. He said, I have these that you can use. So basically, he's the person that sort of sanctioned, approved my advocacy. And because of that, that spread across the land, where people began to use all kinds of individual tools for their Sundance ritual or their tribal rituals, like scarring or tattooing and that type of thing. So that, for me, was a validation of what I was advocating. But I did go through some really painful moments, in terms of my research and interviewing. The painful parts is like having very good friends die of the AIDS virus, and seeing them at the last moment of death, before death. And it's something that AIDS is when you die of AIDS, it's not, and all the cancers associated with and everything like that. It's not a kind death. It's a very painful death, and it's a painful death for the family members and everyone like that too. So I did my research finally, and finally called it complete. I had enough data to just sort of sit here in Boulder and write, but what was going on was that I was still getting a lot of requests, like I do every day, like today, getting requests for help and stuff like that to do different things. And I very rarely say no to friends when they need help doing something. And my committee, famous professors, Dr. Walker as my chair, they ordered me not to leave the city limits of Boulder, that I had to sit here and write my dissertation. And Dr. Ed Rose of sociology, a very famous individual, was appointed my, I guess, watchdog. I had to report to his house almost on a daily basis and show him what I had written. Okay, so I finished this huge document, and I take it to him, and he reads the first paragraph, and he says, "This isn't good enough. You have to rewrite the whole thing." Didn't look at the whole thing, and I was thinking, well, if he didn't look at the whole thing, how would he know that I rewrote it or didn't rewrite the thing? But I went home and spent a whole week rewriting and everything like that, and took it back to him, and so he was basically keeping tabs on me and making sure I didn't leave the city limits of Boulder. And so I eventually wrote something that he approved of, and then Dr. Walker looked at it and he didn't like it, so that required a lot of rewrite and everything like this. It was a long trying experience in terms of writing the dissertation itself. Every now and then I pull it out and I read it, and I said, this is a bunch of crap. It really needs to be rewritten. This really shouldn't have been approved by anyone, but the earlier versions were perhaps even worse than that. But I keep thinking it really needs to be rewritten and updated. Research needs to be updated and everything like that. And so a large part of my dissertation was telling stories of individuals that had the virus and how they went through it and everything like that, their personal experiences of it and stuff. I eventually was approved. My dissertation was approved by the committee, And then I had the oral defense of my dissertation. And the oral defense is like the last stage of this whole PhD process. And one of the requirements of this is that every student that has an oral defense has to advertise it over at the Regents Hall at the graduate school. There's a little bulletin board, and you post a notice saying you're having your oral defense, and the public is invited to the dissertation defense. And so I published, I went over and typed out something and posted on the bulletin board at graduate school and posted over at the anthropology department. And you have to put public is invited. Well, they had a room that particular evening. They had a room set aside in Hale Science where the anthro department had just moved to the university, renovated this building. It's now a gorgeous building. Before there were rats in there were bats and raccoons and everyone living in the attic and everything like that. And the university spent millions renovating it, and they gave it to anthropology, which was a big shock. But it's a beautiful building, and we had one of the rooms in the library, but so many people showed up for the defense. There was about nearly 100 people that showed up for my oral defense. That was a big shock, and so we had to move to an even larger room on the higher floor of the building, and so we all went up there, and my committee was sitting around a big table. Dr. Pinto, Dr. Rose, Dr. Gordon Gee, and Dr. Walker, and another professor that I just forgot his name. Really good person. So they were there, and they began to ask questions. They would go through the pages of my research, and they would ask me specific questions, and I would answer the question, what happened, how it happened, et cetera, et cetera. So that went on for over an hour, about an hour and a half, and then finally Dr. Walker opened it to the public. Anyone that was gathered in the room could ask me a question, and that was even harder questions to answer because my professors knew a lot of what was going on, but the public were asking very specific questions and things like this, and one of them stumped me quite. It was a statistical question on statistics and how the population flows and everything like that. So I had some difficulty at that time answering that, but thinking about it moments later, I thought, this is a great answer, but we had moved on to something else. But the public got their pound of flesh, and at that time. So the committee, Dr. Walker, finally ended that, and he said that there's so many people here that the committee will go into another room. Instead of chasing everyone out of the room, that the committee itself would go to another room and discuss this and everything like that. So they were gone for about 20 minutes, and then they finally came back, and Dr. Walker stood up and he said, well, our decision on this is that welcome Dr. Cambridge, and you pass your oral defense. And so everyone stood up and applauded and everything like that. So it's really a fun time. It's a great time. And so, so the research that I did basically was very unique. It was one of a kind. In fact, it's still one of a kind at this late date. Right at the tail end of my research period, the Center for Disease Control, the Indian Health Service, and other people jumped on the bandwagon and really began to push a public. They had a public campaign, and they were pushing this to get the word out that there was this virus within the Indian population, and that we all needed to be concerned and we all needed to be tested, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some good stories that come out of that and some really bad stories. And it's a situation, one Indian lady claimed to have gotten AIDS from her white doctor boyfriend, and she was pissed off, and so she got onto the speaking circuit. Different places would hire her to tell her story of how she got the virus and everything like that and how she's living with it. Well, come out to be a big fraud. She didn't have the virus. She didn't catch it with a white person, but she had all of these key elements that told a really good story, and that's what people wanted to hear. But it was all fraud. So we have examples like that, but we have other examples of really disheartening stories of people having the AIDS and people living with it, people dying of it. But now we have a situation where there's medication and people are living longer and longer periods of time, and so it's not as poignant, it's not as a big concern as it was at one time. But there are still people, Indian people, getting the virus, and people that are still practicing unsafe sex across the land, and so the virus is beginning to pick up now again, because we have a new population that is like not aware of the AIDS virus. They're really not concerned. They're young, so they're going to have sex and everything like that. I was interviewing this Indian guy here in Boulder, a student here in Boulder, and I knew he was going to the bathhouses in Denver, and I said, "How many times do you have sex?" And I was thinking in terms of a year or something like that. He said, "In a day," and I said, "Well, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, in a day." He said, well, on a good day, maybe 20 to 30 times. And I didn't believe him. I could not believe him. I couldn't and even fathom that. In my case, like once every 3 years or every 4 years, but like 20 to 30 times a day. But then you get into the discussion of what is sex? When is sex? He would go to the bathhouse in Denver, and they had a false wall, and he said he would just stick his penis through the hole in the wall, and someone on the other side would suck it. So that was a sex act. So that counted as one of the 20 times. Or they would actually have penetrating sex of one sort or the other in the steam room or somewhere else and stuff like that. So he'll go down there and spend a couple of hours and maybe have in that short period of time 10 to 15 sexual contacts. For me, it was just unbelievable. And so the more I delved into this, the more I got into when is sex and what's our sexual practices. And man, did I learn a lot. I just couldn't believe some of the things that human beings are dreaming and creating and experiencing. The human mind is very creative when it comes to sex. I just couldn't believe some of the things they were doing. Putting snakes up their butt and stuff like that, so to get a thrill of the snake moving around in their insides and stuff like that. I just couldn't believe that. And then it became an issue. Can sexual fluids get onto sex toys and be transferred to another individual? Well, yes, it can be done. So unless you know your partner very, very well and stuff like that, you really need to clean your sex toys constantly and everything like that, and disinfect them and stuff. So everyone enjoyed the story in terms of what I had done and everything like that. And so once I got my PhD, dissertation defense done with, then I went to graduation, and that became another experience, just graduating with my PhD, and it changed the world. It really did. the people that I was fighting against, the younger generation of anthropologists that wouldn't accept me as a graduate student, really amazing. After graduation, they came up and congratulated me. It was like I was a member of their sorority fraternity now, and that opened that massive door. Couldn't get jobs or anything like that, but that door was wide open, that they had to accept me and accept me as an authority on certain issues and things like that. It was very interesting. I get calls daily, from people needing help. I'm helping a group in New Mexico trying to get federal status as a tribe. They're really interesting history. Then I'm helping another group, Barney Bush, a really good friend of mine, trying to get state recognition for his little group in Illinois, a group of Shawnees, which is their original homeland. And he came really close. All he needed was a governor's signature in Illinois. It was passed by the House and Senate there. And then they referred it out, and the bill died. The governor never signed it. And it seems like there was some undercover, strange politics involved by the coal industry that killed the bill. And so he's preparing for a fight, and he's gotten a couple of the legislative people there that are considering re-sponsoring the bill. So he might have a better chance this time around. So been working on that, and just a number of other things and stuff, and trying to read some books and stuff. And the older you get, you sort of forget stuff. And so I'm rereading some of these books that I haven't read in a long time. I have a book in the bedroom that was written in 1932 that I'm rereading and stuff. And just as a reminder, and it causes me to relook at old things and to think about things differently. Mm-hmm. They're my first impression. And so I'm slowly looking at books again, and I'm waiting for a book from the library on from the Homeland Security on intelligence in the United States. So basically, this is like in line with my research now that I'm doing on American Indian FBI informants. Mm. So I've been doing this for about 2 years, and it's amazing how the FBI was able to very easily to get Indian people to inform on each other. For $20 you could pay an Indian person in San Francisco to find out what was going on in San Francisco, if there was any militant Indian action going on this week, all for $20. And then the FBI has FBI informants in the leadership of almost all of the Indian organizations in the United States, and some in EOP programs in universities also. And so their arm extends everywhere. So this is all intelligence, and there's new approaches to intelligence now. A lot of it's statistical, where people show up and everything like that. So I'm doing some statistical analysis now on the if protesting activism, confrontation politics, if that's effective, and using a reference of you have a protest, say violence breaks out, Indians are arrested, what happens afterwards? And so I'm putting this on a statistical graph of when things are active and a lot of people are involved, and then basically there's a long period of time where no one does anything, and then something happens and the spike goes up. Well, this long period of time follows again, And what that is at the moment of action, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. But the period of inaction is days or years. And that is because of legal action. So if you get arrested, you have to find an attorney, hopefully a free attorney, and basically you're involved with the legal system, and that may go on for a long period of time. And so what happens is that if you're going to participate in something else later on down the road, you sort of have second thoughts because you've had this negative experience with finding a free attorney, of just basically dealing with that attorney, and then with dealing with the judge and the legal system and everything like that. And that leaves a very bad taste in your mouth. And so you don't want to do it again. Because the judge in the first case said, you better behave yourself, you're on probation for 50 years, and if you do something else, we're going to send you in prison for life. And so you really do have second thought. So this is what goes on in terms of what I'm looking at, this type of social behavior and the length of time between a lot of situations. So the question is that political activism in terms of violent confrontation that will guarantee you participation in the United States legal system, is that worth it? And so that's what I'm trying to figure out now. And so in doing this, I'm looking at FBI informants in terms of, hi there, we really should have a riot today, the FBI informant will tell you. We really should storm the police station. And so he's antagonizing you. He's building up your ego. He's pushing you towards violent behavior. He's not going to get arrested. Or even if he does get arrested alongside you, he has already been guaranteed that he will not serve jail time. So I'm finding many examples of this. So this is entrapment, but entrapment is legal, basically. And it's your individual behavior. It's believing this guy that you should go and throw a rock through the police station window and whatnot, so it gets you into trouble, and this is all your individual action. It's not his, the FBI informant guy. So people are pushing that direction. The other scenario of getting arrested, there's hundreds of people that were arrested in the recent South Dakota pipeline controversy, and it's a situation whereby some people that were arrested were actually set up to be arrested. They are basically innocent victim of all of this. But they arrested so many people that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have hundreds of people that they can turn into future informants. So if you have a young kid that's 16 arrested at the pipeline protest, they bring him in, threaten him with execution or life imprisonment and stuff. He can't find a free attorney. He has to depend on his family to give him money for an attorney. That puts a burden on the family. The family gets upset with you, etc., etc. Or the family will say, well, just stay in jail. We don't have any money to help you. You're getting visits from nice people saying, well, if you become our informant in the future, we'll let you go. You can have probation. We'll talk to the judge, blah, blah, blah. And that young 16-year-old kid will say yes. And so this is a protest, which was a good protest. I really thought this was an excellent reason to protest because of its association with an Indian tribe, with a federally recognized tribe. But this was a protest that was a ripe recruiting ground for future informants, for people that will work with law enforcement in the future. So the law enforcement agencies have gleaned dozens and dozens and dozens of people from this protest that will work with them now and in the future. So one has to be careful of situations like this. And one always has to be suspect of someone telling you to go protest, to go get arrested, to throw a rock through a window or something like that. In the National Indian Youth Council many years ago, in the 60s, we decided that we would be upfront with what we were doing. We believed that it was impossible to keep a secret, which is true, impossible to keep a secret. So a lot of the Indian organizations that do protests have these secret meetings. They tend to meet secretly somewhere to plan something, etc., because they know that what they're going to do probably is going to be a legal confrontation and there will be arrests made and everything like that. So they don't want to show their hand in the early sense. They want to basically plan and do a lot of things in secret. We were of the opposite opinion that everything had to be up front. If you were going to do something illegally, then you have to fess up and do your time. If you're willing to do your time, you're willing to get arrested, you're not going to get a free attorney and whatnot, and a nice person comes and says, will you be our informant? You would say no. And they say, well, you're going to go to prison for a long time. And you say, okay. And you go to prison for a long time. So it's a situation that there wasn't any fear factor involved. You knew that you were making the commitment for the movement. You knew that you're going to participate in the movement. You knew that some of this stuff perhaps is going to be illegal. But this whole scenario was designed by us that you would accept the responsibility of what you did and you would serve the time. So that sort of defunct the FBI in terms of what they were trying to do with us and everything like that. So the sad mistake that most, if not all, Indian organizations that attempt to do stuff in secret, that's the number one failure. That will guarantee failure, that will guarantee that people will become informants because you create a rich field of people that participate in your situation, that will get arrested, that will go through the court system, everything like that, will be giving them a deal. And this is really sort of a sad situation. So in terms of my analysis, I'll be talking about that, talking about all of this stuff, and basically pointing to individuals that have been publicly identified as FBI informants and how they tend to push an organization into an illegal activity scenario, which means that everyone gets arrested, which is an effective way of destroying an organization. If all your leadership and a lot of part of your members are in jail, the organization effectively dies and isn't around anymore. Robert Reed's a really nice person. He was the director of the Chicago Indian Center, and he put us up in a hotel, a real nice hotel in old Chicago, and he took us around to the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, different social activist programs. Met Jesse Jackson there and stuff like that, and all kinds of cool people. And our meeting with the Black Panthers, they went on this rampage that they were claiming the whole South. The whole South was going to be New Africa. And I said, no. And I said, no, that's not going to work. That's all Indian land. So we got into this fight of Indian versus black land type thing and stuff. And that was we were really getting shouting at each other. And all the students were slowly sneaking out to the bus that was outside waiting for us. And I guess some of the gang saw the Black Panthers putting on their guns and stuff. And then one of the side rooms, they were really getting mad. So Delmer, this was before the shootout. This was a short time before some of the people that were there got killed by the police, Chicago police. But Delmer, as big as Delmer is, and he picks me up physically I don't know what the hell's going on. I was really getting pissed at these Black Panther guys. I was being surrounded by these huge monsters. And so Delmer picks me up, puts me over his shoulder like that, and walks me out. So my head is in this direction. He's going towards the door, and I'm still arguing with these black guys and stuff. And then finally we got in the bus, and he said, "Charlie, you don't know when to shut up." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, they're getting their guns." But it was really sad because a short time afterwards, they had a shootout with the police, and people were killed and everything like that. And so some of those people I was arguing with, are gone, unfortunately. But this is the Boulder Medicine Wheel, and this was a slide presentation. This is an old aerial shot of Broadway, the National Bureau of Standards land, not too far away. But the right side of the picture is facing east, the west is on the left side of the picture. This was a picture taken in the late 50s after the National Bureau of Standards was built. But this line that comes down like a big vein is an irrigation ditch. And this was built by the pioneers way back when to bring water to farm fields and ranches and things like that. And so it was a big project. It goes throughout Boulder, goes near campus, different places. It still carries water to this day. And there's a lot of trees on the property now, but this was land that was acquired by the U.S. government for the National Bureau of Standards under the Department of Commerce to build a new lab. And this was in the 1950s, mid-1950s, when this was built. This is sunset, summer solstice. It's really sort of interesting because the summer solstice from the middle of the field basically sort of fits in a groove on Flagstaff Mountain. So there's some sort of directional situation that we have with the moving of the sun. And this is winter solstice. The sun is just coming up and coming across the snow, basically coming down Broadway. This is a really interesting rock that I discovered on the property. Before the photos and everything like that, was sitting at the Oyate Indian student office on campus, University of Colorado, at the UMC building. Was there, and the phone rang. The student said, "Charlie, you better talk to this guy. He's talking about rocks or something." And immediately I thought, well, I get a lot of calls like that. People find rocks and they think it's some sort of cultural item, artifact from the deep past and stuff. And so I took the phone, and it's Bill Spang, a person that's lived here in Boulder for a long, long time. He lives right across the property, right in the neighborhood, just to the left of this photo. But he walks in the field all the time. So he called the office wanting to talk about rocks. There's rocks that he found and everything like this, and that he wanted someone to look at it to see if they're Indian or not, and he thought they were Indian. So I thought this was a person that went to Arizona, collected some rocks, brought them back to Boulder, and wanted me to look at them. I said, "Okay, I'll meet you," and I thought he was going to give me a home address or something, but he said, "No, we'll have to meet at the NIST property, National Bureau of Standards property." And I said, "Well, okay, that's on my way home. I'm just about to catch the bus now." And he said, "Well, I can meet you now." I was feeling very on edge about this, because this was at a time that some of the white Nazi types were beating up people in Denver at bus stops and in different places in the area. Took the bus down, got off in the middle of the field out there, and he met me, and this was a skinny white dude with a bike. He led me more into the property where trees and grass are growing, and I thought, he's going to shoot me out here. And then all of a sudden he shouts out, "Do you see the rock?" See, I thought he had rocks in his backpack, and he was trying to go to a secret place to open up his backpack to show me these rocks that he brought in from someplace. But no, he actually finally dawned on me, he was actually shouting if I saw the rocks on the ground. So he said this, is this something? He's pointing to the ground, and I'm looking at the ground finally, and it dawned on me, he didn't want me to show me rocks in his backpack. He wanted to show me rocks on the ground. Immediately, I started thinking, this is crazy. There can't be any Indian stuff in the city of Boulder. The other thing, the more that he kept pointing to the ground, here's a circle here, here's a circle here, and everything like that, the archaeological part of my mind kicks in, where a lot of issue with people seeing patterns on the ground is that they're human beings. Human beings with their mind automatically create patterns in what they see. And so in most cases, these patterns aren't created by human intervention, like moving rocks around, like with a building, a foundation or something like that. They're just naturally occurring. They're just rocks laying on the ground. And the human mind will perceive a pattern in that. So I said no, and so I was explaining him this idea of human mind and patterns and stuff like that. And so he's showing me all these rocks and stones on the ground and everything. And I said, no, there's nothing here. I said, but there's something over there. And I just did that automatically. Out of the corner of my eye, my eye perceived a pattern. It wasn't looking at it directly or anything like that. I just sort of automatically pointed to it. And lo and behold, there was something there. It was a stone circle of really large stones, rocks, that were done in a circle. And I had to crawl into the circle because it was mostly covered by a big bush. Somehow my eye caught this circle, and I said, this is something. I didn't know what the heck it was, but this was something that was created by human beings. These are large stones that were intentionally put in a circle. Basically it was the size maybe half of this room, and the big bush was covering it. And I said, here's something. And then he led me in another direction, and there was all of these stones that was like in the rubble, this huge, like a dump truck came and just dumped all these stones. And I'm looking at this, and I said, this is sort of really odd. I'm not too sure how this was created in a geological sense. Why are these rocks here and everything? And so and then Bill Spang disappears. I never see him until years later. He was like this ghost that came in and went out. So I don't see him until years later. But he's now a Facebook friend that puts comments on some of my postings and stuff. But he started me thinking, and basically he's the person responsible for my looking at stuff on this property, for Indian stuff on this property. I spent more time walking around, and particularly this rubble of stuff just was a basic puzzle, and this small circle of stones on the north side of this rubble was something a little bit strange. And where it came from, what it came from, no idea. But what we have is like Indian activity, different tribes through thousands of years of wandering around. And then we have the pioneers, we have the railroad, we have ranches, we have farms, we have the university, we have the government people coming in doing construction work. So there's this decades and decades and decades of human activity out there. Now, why they would create the small circle of stones, I have no idea. Why would they create this rubble of stones? I have no idea. But there were some other stones that people said were burials. They sort of look like that, but no, I don't think they are that. Because farmers will collect equal-sized stones and put them in piles and things like that. So you may have a pile of stones that may be 3, 4, 5, 6 feet high, but eventually the stones will sink into the ground. They sort of look like burials, but they really are not. They're just farmers doing stuff. So I immediately reject that within minutes after seeing those. It became a puzzle. So I'm wandering around the field here, and I found this stone that I call the Moses stone. Now, this is a big slab, a stone, like flagstone. It's a white color, maybe 3 feet in width. I'm guessing at that because half of it is buried in the ground. And I use the word burial because there's something wrong with this picture. This stone should not be standing like that on edge, because it's in a small gully, and so the water is flowing in this direction down towards Broadway, and through time that should have fallen down, tipped over, and be flat. Basic physics. But this thing is buried into the ground on the edge, and there's one stone here and one stone here, so it looks like a gun sight. So when you stand behind the Moses stone and use it as a gun sight, it points directly to this rubble of stones. So now that sort of is a plus for this rubble of stone to mean something. And that became the big thing. So what I did was I left the Moses stone, and I'm going to the center of the rubble. And I find this stone that I call the arrow stone. So when you look right at it, it looks like this arrow. And this points directly to the rubble of stones. So we have, and these two stones are in the exact position for the winter solstice sunrise. Now this is when the sun sets on this particular day, the winter solstice, and it fits right in the perfect groove between Green Mountain and Bears Peak. It just fits right in that groove perfectly. Now with the rubble of stones, I'm crawling around in the bush and everything like that, and so you see all this rubble of stuff. But what I find these stones. So what we have are these stones, basically 4 different stones surrounded by these stones. So this is not a intelligent squirrel doing this. This is human activity that is doing this. Oh, let's go back. In the bush, these stones here form like a U shape. It's U shape, and it's stacked stones about maybe 1.5 feet high. So these are intentionally stacked. These are not natural event. This is human activity. So I have a U shape stack of stones. I have these 4 stones surrounded by the other stones, and what happens is that they're nearby this rubble of stones, the stones here. And there's a lot of reasons why there would be a rubble of stones. And so I had the Moses stone, I had the arrow stone, I had these other 2 stones of human activities, artifacts that are near this rubble of stones. And then I had the small circle stones. So I'm accumulating human activity. And so there's something here. There's really something here. So what we have is a circle. I did a survey. There was a surveyor that came out from Denver, and I flagged all of the white, pale white flagstone. And then what we began to do after that was that here's the rubble of stones, here's that small circle stone, here is other stones that are popping up that are really in line with this huge circle. But see, all I had was sort of that. This was missing. This was totally missing. So I go out there, spent more and more time, and I'm with Dr. Bob McFarland, who helped a lot with this activity in terms of discover what this all was. So I basically began to use the term, this is a medicine wheel. This is a Boulder medicine wheel. And Bob and I went out there trying to look around the ditch and everything like that on this end of the property, which is the south side of the property. And Bob yelled, and he's nearby, and he said, here's a circle of stone. And I looked at that and I said, no, Bob, that's not a circle, but this is a circle. Again, without knowing why I said that. But I was standing on a pile of dirt. You could make out around the boundary of this pile of dirt this circle of stones. And why I said this is a circle, I have no idea. But I was standing in the middle of this circle of stones. And it's a twin. It's a twin to this one. And the distance to the rubble is only off by like a foot and a half. It's almost right on the money. But see, what happened was that the ditch is coming along. See, the people are digging the ditch. They're throwing dirt and stone all over the place and stuff. But when they come to this stone here, the rocks are too big. We don't want to deal with it. So they came up right to the edge of the circle of stones and went to the left and just went around it. So in the ditch, you have this sort of curve around this circle of stones. So then I have basically something that is balanced. There's something balanced. And so when I did the circle, I used this and went around compass, did that, and then discovered that these stones are falling into place. And these are large stones on the property. So what we have is that we have winter solstice, but we never could clarify the summer solstice, because I believe that the farm that was there and the ranch that was there, they removed all the big rocks that defined the summer solstice. So the only thing that we could find was some stones that were way out here, off-centered, that would point to a summer solstice. But that perhaps is an error in terms that the stones we really needed were removed by the farmers or ranchers in the past. But in terms of the winter solstice, we're right on the money. It goes to the center, it goes to the arrow stone and the Moses stone. Then it gets really intriguing. When I went around with the surveyor, he plotted out all the stones of a particular type scattered throughout the property, and this is the result of that survey. So what we have is in the red circle is the original finding of stones, and then what I did was I took the diameter of this, and with the compass drew this, that also stones were laid out in a pattern. So this blue circle is the exact twin of the red circle, and these are from existing rocks that were on the ground. So we have twin circles, which is really a neat idea, that we have stones on the ground that point to two identical circles, same diameter, same dimensions, everything like that. But one thing that we also found that was really sort of interesting was that there's a line of rocks along this line, and this is almost right on the money of true north and true south. But from the center of this blue circle, these stones lined up with Flagstaff Mountain, lined up with the Flatirons, the position of first and second and third Flatiron. In other words, the line of stones pointed to certain points on the horizon, and that's not by accident. That's human activity. The one that was really intriguing, the best part of this, is that there's these circles of stone that occurred, and mathematically they're almost twice 1 point something bigger than the previous circle. So the circles are getting bigger and bigger in a mathematical progression. And why this is like in a wave, it's like this wave is really sort of an interesting puzzle. Not too sure why that is, but the stones, in terms of following a mathematical progression, creating circles and a mathematical progression, this is a big puzzle, and they're right on the money mathematically. So this is something that was really important that I thought to the history of Boulder, and this is why Amanda and I filed a federal lawsuit against the Department of Commerce to stop the construction of a new building. All of this gets wiped out. This whole thing gets wiped out. And these get wiped out because they put a holding pond down there, so at least 90% of what you see on the screen would get wiped out because of the construction of the new building. So with the medicine wheel, Amanda and I filed a lawsuit. Bob McFarland, I drove down to the federal courthouse in Denver, and we went in and talked to the clerk and asked him, how do you file a federal lawsuit? And the room is full of these very wealthy attorneys, and there's nice suits and ties and everything like that, and very cool haircuts. And so Bob and I are asking this black clerk, how do you file a lawsuit? And he said, who do you want to sue? And we said, well, the Department of Commerce, the National Bureau of Standards in Boulder, Colorado. And he said, really? What for? Well, we believe there's an Indian medicine wheel on the property, and they're going to build this building, and it'll be destroyed. And he said, well, that sounds good. And he said, just give me a second. And he got some forms and brought it over, and it was like a really simple form, two pages, your address and everything, the reason why you're suing and who you're suing and everything like that. And we had to pay $50. I believe that was the cost, either $25 or $50, but I think it was $50. And so Bob gave him some money and stuff. The clerk said, who's going to serve the subpoenas? And he explained how that worked. You can either hire the sheriff's office people to do that, or you can do it yourself. And so it became a situation that Bob would serve the subpoenas, but he couldn't file the lawsuit. I had to file the lawsuit. So I filled out the paperwork and signed at the bottom. Later on, Amanda is added to the lawsuit. And then Bob, right after we got the subpoenas and filled those forms out, we drove around Denver and Boulder delivering the subpoenas. And so Dr. McFarland would go into the offices of various federal buildings and gave people subpoenas and everything like that. And man, did that cause a big firestorm within the federal government and state government and city government, everything like that, because this was a big deal. Getting a new building for the National Bureau of Standards that would house NOAA and some of their offices. We were filing a lawsuit to stop construction. So immediately, within hours, this is across the country, people are calling people in Washington, D.C., and the Department of Commerce is in Boulder is all upset, and people are calling politicians, who is Charlie Cambridge, what is going on here. The neighborhood that formed an association, they filed a lawsuit with the federal government also. The people that live in homes around the NIST property, because they were using the NIST property to walk their dogs and everything like that, and a lot of wildlife lived there and everything like that, so they wanted to keep that. And so they filed a lawsuit, and so Amanda and I had our lawsuit. And so the Department of Commerce called for an immediate hearing, which occurred within a matter of days. And we didn't have an attorney. So, but what happens is that the neighborhood association, they hired a law firm, and so they had a lady attorney. And from that law firm, there was this gentleman who I can't remember his name. He volunteered to be our attorney, and so we go into federal court. Oh, I can't remember the judge's name. I think he still may be on the bench, but he is so angry at home association and their attorney. He just really super angry. He's yelling from the bench and basically calling down the attorney and basically saying this is a waste of time. So he throws out their case, and it's our turn. So our case was announced and stuff, and Washington had sent some really important people out from D.C., some really top-notch attorneys from the Department of Commerce. They came up to their side of the table, and we came up to our table. Our attorney thought that we were going to get really super trash, but really like a night and day. The judge became very kind to us, very nice to us, and he wanted to hear what our case was, and so we were filing all kinds of Indian religious freedom acts and everything like that and whatnots, and which under these acts have never won anything. They in all its history of since Congress passed a lot of these acts to protect Indian religion and everything like that, there hasn't been really a single case that basically has been won under these cases and stuff. And then we threw the archaeological regulations and laws into that. So we had a pile of stuff. The judge says, okay, we're going to go to trial on this. He wanted to hear more of our argument and everything like that. So the Department of Commerce attorneys were really upset. They were trying to argue with the judge and everything. He said, no, we're going to go to trial here. Schedule the trial for within 2 or 3 days. So this was going really on a fast track. And and he said, I'm going to sign a temporary injunction against construction of the property. So he issued a temporary injunction. So that made everyone upset, even a bit more. And so there wasn't anything that the Department of Commerce could do. They had to halt everything. Nothing was really going on anyway, but this image of having a temporary injunction that they couldn't do anything, it was a little bit nagging to them. And so we came back to trial. I was on the witness stand. So the Department of Commerce were questioning my expertise. And it was something that the judge said, no, he knows what he's talking about. The court considers him as an expert. And by that terminology, I was sanctioned by federal court as an expert witness. I am now an expert witness. I have that credential to testify in federal court, state court, or local court as an anthropologist, archaeologist, etc. So through that case, I was declared an expert. And this is a very high distinction that a lot of people don't have. They can't testify in court as an expert unless the court grants them that status. And in some cases, the court will not. But in this case, I was declared an expert.
Is this after your doctorate?
Yeah, this was after the doctorate. And it was really sort of interesting. I think it was after my doctorate. I have to look at the time frame of when this case came out, but it was close to the same time. And what occurred was that the judge really sort of ruled in our behalf. See, the argument was the government conceded that the west side of the property was sacred Indian land, and that the east side of the property was sacred Indian land. But the middle is where the building was going up. And so they weren't conceding that the middle was sacred Indian land. And so when I was on the witness stand, I said, well, how can the head be sacred and the feet be sacred, but the stomach's not, which is the middle? And the judge agreed with that. He said, yeah, the whole thing is sacred. And so we won in terms of our position that the whole land was sacred Indian land. They weren't saying it was a medicine wheel. They were just saying that this is sacred Indian land. But he said that even though he considered the whole area sacred Indian land and that needed protection, he had to rule on behalf of the public. It was in the best interest of the public to have the building built. And so on that scale, then we technically lost the case. So on one end we did win, on the other end we did win, and the building was built. But it did change a lot of situations here in Boulder. The city of Boulder and the federal government then appointed American Indian advisors from the different tribes in Colorado and around the state. And so they have periodical meetings with Indian tribes, and the tribes do consultant work on a need basis. So it just changed a lot in terms of the way the Department of Commerce does things here in Boulder and the city of Boulder. And that's still in effect to this day. Our attorney was really amazed that the judge granted a temporary injunction, and that we proceeded to court and did the trial. And so the court trial was really a learning experience too. But that's when I get declared an expert witness. And so what proceeds after that, a lot of the things that I've done has been based on that, being defined as an expert witness in federal court. They have over 100 attorneys in their law firm in Denver, and I get a call one day from one of the attorneys asking if I could be an expert witness. The Cow Creek tribe in California, I think it's California or maybe Oregon, but they filed a lawsuit against the Indian Motorcycle Company. Now, the Indian Motorcycle Company is purchased by a Canadian company. They felt that they could earn more money by not building motorcycles, but by merchandising, earning fees, licensing fees from the word Indian. Because way back when, at the turn of the 1900s, when the Indian Motorcycle Company was created, they trademarked the word Indian, chief, papoose, wigwam, and several other words. The Canadian company felt that this was, they were given a monopoly, and that anyone else that uses these words should pay a fee to them. They declared that any Indian tribe was using their word Indian or tribe or chief. No, not tribe wasn't not the word in there, but the word chief or Indian, those tribes would have to pay a fee to the Canadian company. So the Cow Creek, how they get involved is that they were trying to actually buy the Indian Motorcycle Company. Very wealthy tribe, casino is doing really good business, and so they had a lot of wealth laying around, and so they wanted to invest it, and they were considering buying the company. But the company is sold to another company, not the Indians. So the Indians got mad and they're launching a lawsuit. And so this all comes up about the trademark of the word Indian. Their position was that no one in the world could use the word Indian. So if you're from India and have an Indian restaurant in New York City, you would be required to pay a licensing fee if your sign outside said Indian restaurant. And so it turned into a really interesting debate. And so I was writing how this is in the public domain, word Indian, and you can't basically create a monopoly around that word because the U.S. government, European powers, Columbus used the word Indian, and so it's been in the public domain for centuries. So the opposition, the Indian Motorcycle Company, hires an Indian attorney from up north, and he's arguing that yes, the motorcycle company does have exclusive rights over the word Indian. So it became a battle between myself and this individual, and so we were writing different things at each other and everything like that. But eventually there's a settlement out of court and the whole case is dropped. But man, that created a whirl of paper, and the attorney fees were substantial. Everyone is fighting over this situation. So yeah, the adventures go on.